Hi everyone, this is Micah and welcome back to part 2 of my Symfony application project demonstration where we're going to build a TV watch list program so that we can keep track of the shows we're watching on TV. And just as a recap from part 1 where we built the Symfony application, and we're basically just going to set up a user account. We're going to build ourselves a list of streaming providers and then add the ability to add shows, a list of shows we're watching, and users will be able to rate them from 1 to 5. We're not going to go any deeper than that in this project probably. This is, again, a quick overview. If you want to see how this was built, go back and watch part 1 of this series. And just as a recap here, we've kind of got a fresh start in this session that I'm recording now. We made sure that all our Docker images are up to date, and I started up Docker, and then I got into a shell prompt inside my Docker container because that's where we're going to do the next piece of our work. And I just kind of did a recap to look at our Git log to see what we did last time, which was the initial setup and commit. Tweaked some Docker configuration things to get us up and running and ready to go in Docker, and then added our new base template and controller so that we could have this web page here. For the next part of this project, we're going to walk through the security steps in the Symfony documentation. If you're planning on building a full Symfony project, I highly recommend reading all of the information on this page as it's quite important. But for this demo, I'm simply going to walk through the steps quickly and get to the pieces we need. Scrolling down, the first thing we see is that we need to require the Symfony security bundle. However, you may recall that when we built the project in part 1 of this series, we required the web app bundle, and that already includes the Symfony security bundle, so we don't need to add it again. This is probably already set up for us as well. This first piece of the security YAML file, we can go ahead and take a look at that in our project. That's going to be in config packages security. And you'll see that this looks pretty much exactly the same as the documentation shows. We'll need to make some changes in this a little bit later on, but right now we don't have to do anything. We'll keep this file here. And then we want to go ahead and configure. The first thing we want to do is set up the user. We won't get into the firewall in this tutorial too much. And then the access control, things like that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make an entity in our database. That's the one thing I think I want to come back and take a quick peek at here. Let's take a look at our database. We didn't really look at that in the first video. So we'll fire up phpMyAdmin here. And we'll take a look, and our applications database is simply app. And what we need to do to make entities in the database is define that entity, and we're going to use a command to make a user entity first. We need to build database migrations that will send database information, send the table structures to the database and create the structures, and then we need to actually run those migrations. So just showing right here that we have a brand new clean database. There are no tables here at all. And we'll go back over here to the instructions, and it says that the first thing we need to do is make user. You can sometimes get away with not running that PHP command. So we're just going to say bin. We're in our application directory. There's a bin directory here that has the console in it, and so bin console make user. We want to call this user. That's the default. Yes, we want to store it in the database. Really, the only properties I want to put in here right now are going to be username, password, the ID, which will get added automatically, and the user's roles, which will also get added automatically. So some websites like to log in with an email address. Personally, I prefer username. So let's go with that. Yes, it's going to need to check hashed passwords. And boom, here we are. We have we've added a new user entity class. And so let's do that. Let's created these two files here. Let's go take a look. We'll look at the repository later. But the thing we want to look at right now is this user entity. So we'll come down into source entities. And now we have a user entity here. And you'll see that this is a PHP class that has a few columns in it. It has the ID, an integer column for the ID. It has a string for the username. It has an array for roles. And then it has a column for passwords. And then it has the getter and setter functions. Actually, it doesn't have this. Yeah, it has some of the setter functions, but you don't have a setter for the ID because that doesn't change. So we have the getter and setter functions, just a very simple PHP entity class. And the instructions right here tell us the next thing we need to do is we can use make entity to add more fields to our user, and then we're going to run make migration. So again, bin console make migration. And that runs and it creates a new file in our migrations directory. And we want to stop and take a look at this. So we go to migrations. Here's our code. It is a tad on the messy side. So if you want, you can definitely clean this up. And this is the first time that we've created a table in our database. So the Symfony is also going to add this table for messages. We've got our code a little bit cleaner now. That is obviously an optional step, and the next step is optional too, but I'm going to recommend it. The problem that we have with our site right now is that we're going to create our users table, and therefore we'll be able to add an administrator user, but we don't have a very good way of getting that user in the database now. We could do some things manually. We could hash a password and then go into phpMyAdmin and add a user, or go to the MySQL prompt and add a user into this database. But I think it's a little bit more elegant if we just go ahead and take a minute to modify this first migration and have it create the user for us. We're going to create an admin user for us. So in order to do that, we need to do two things. First, we need to hash passwords. So we need to grab the Symfony password hasher factory, and so this is the class that we're going to use to create our hashed password. And then we grab a little bit of code from a previous project real quick here, and I'm going to add another method to this class that will, what this is going to do is it's going to take a password that we're going to provide in a minute, and it's going to use the password hasher factory to hash a password. It's going to take a plain text password that we give it, and it's going to return a hashed password. Now, the place we want to use that is in the up. If you notice, all of these have, all your migrations are going to have an up method, which is to add changes to the database, and a down method, which is to undo those changes in the database. So we're going to add just one more bit of code here to set up our password and put a user in the database. So inside this method, right after the user table gets created, let's go ahead and put another space in here just to make it more readable. So we're going to take a password and we're going to hash it with this method we created down here. And if you notice, we're going to read the environment. So we're going to need the admin password set in our environment before we run this. I'm going to show you how to do that in a second here as well. And then we have an add SQL. We're just gonna do an insert here, some SQL code, and I'm gonna just fold this up a little bit so it's not as messy. And so we're gonna insert into user ID 1. The name is admin. We're going to put in a JSON array that sets the user's roles to role user and role admin, and then we're going to provide the password. And again, the password we are providing here in our values is this hashed password. Normally, we'd want to escape and parameterize our insert. We wouldn't want to put the password right in an insert function like this. But because this is going to run in a very controlled environment by us when installing the site, I'm not going to take the time to do the normal protections I would do on an insert to make sure that it's clean. We know it's going to be we know this is going to be a clean value because it's been through the hasher. So now we've added this, and so now we need to go actually in two places. We should go to set up our environment for this. So the first is we'll go to our applications.env, and let's go ahead and just add another comment section here. I like to just add a section here for my application. I just put it right here. Everything else in here has been added by Symfony as far as what's going to be in the environment, including some example database URLs, things like that. Actually, sometimes even change the SQLite, make the SQLite the default database URL for the application, but that doesn't really matter. The important thing is right now I need a placeholder value because these are not your real values for admin password. And so admin password, we're just going to say is change me. But that's not the one we're going to use. Because the other way we can do this, there are ways, if you look at this, and we'll do it soon, there's a way to make a local copy of this env file to set up some of our security features. We'll do that later. But for right now, I am just going to go at my prompt here, and I'm going to say export admin password equals admin. And this now will be the password that it should eventually use when we're ready to test our login. So now we are ready. We've reviewed our migration, and now we're ready to run the migration. So we're going to say bin console doctrine migrations migrate. And if we did everything right, it won't break. Thank goodness it didn't break. The way you can tell what migrations need to be run or have been run at any time, by the way, is bin console doctrine migrations list. And you'll see that this is our first migration here. It was migrated, and this is the time it was, and it took just under half a second to run. So if we pop back over here now into our database and refresh this, you'll see we have, not one, not two, but three tables. The first table that gets created is doctrines migration table, and it's just keeping track of which migrations have run. So that's nice to have. This is that messenger messages table that we looked at before that just got created, and we don't have to do anything with this right now. And here's our user table. So let's take a look at the structure first. And yes, we have an ID that is set to auto increment. We have username. It is 180 characters because this is using 4-byte characters, and so this is honoring the limit length for index fields in MariaDB and MySQL. We have our roles as a long text, and then we have our password stored. So now let's go look at our user, and sure enough, here's user ID 1. Username is admin. The roles are the roles we assigned, and here's a lovely hashed password that we cannot read or crack or figure out what it is. So we need to remember that we set the password to admin when we go to log in later. But we still can't log in. If you remember from the first video, this login link doesn't actually do anything or go anywhere. So we need to go back to the Symfony instructions now and read along a little farther. So we can skip over a bunch of this information, which again, I highly recommend reading later. Let's double check and make sure that the Symfony security got lined up, and it did. The security YAML file got updated, and it set our class to app entity user and property username. When we did the console make user, it took care of that for us. So this reminds me, this is probably actually a really good time to come back, do a get status. And let's see what we modified. So we're going to use git add -p first to see just the modified files and what changed. We added our default admin password, and we see the security was set up for users in memory. Now we have an app user provider that is entity, and we've set up that information. And now we have these 3 files that got created that make up the things we need for our user entity. So add user entity, and now those are the things that we have saved so far. So this has been taken care of. This step has been taken care of for us, and you can look at some of these other options we have down here. Here's some information about hashing passwords. This is part of the foundation for how we got all of those things worked out and set up a hasher. We don't need we don't need email verification right now. Well, the security hash password piece was already installed for us, so we don't need to worry about that. Firewalls are good. What do we have in here for firewalls now? Yes, this piece already, the default main firewall already got set up for us as well. So that was all taken care of when we ran make user. And so now here are our ways that we can come in and authenticate users, and we're going to go with the nice simple form login. So we are going to make a controller. I'm actually going to call it, they recommend calling it login. I'm going to call it security. So we're going to make a new controller called security control. In fact, I'm going to say security controller. Follow the good naming conventions that, even though it's a little bit redundant, we're going to make sure that we know our controller is a controller. Get status, we'll see that it added another template in the security directory called index.html.twig. Personally, I don't like all these directories, so we're going to move templates security index.html.twig just to templates login.html.twig, and then we can remove that directory. So now we have these 2 files that got created. Obviously now we're going to have to go and take a look at this and fix it. And then we'll also have to add some things here to make sure that everything is working. So here's our controller. Now the default matches, the default route matches the name of the controller. So we'll change this back to login. And we'll call this app login. So this is the app login route. It's at /login. And then we want to change the template path to just be login.html.twig. And it's doing the same thing we did with our first controller, where it's passing the controller name to that template. So if we were to go right now, after we made this change, and go to our, actually, let's do this. Let's go back to our app template, and now we actually have the path we can put in for app login. We have this, we have app login is now defined, so we can uncomment this link. So now this is actually going to say, if the user is not logged in, then create a link in our navigation, and the path is going to be the path to app login. So come back and we'll refresh this page. And the first time it runs after you make a bunch of changes, it's almost like 4 seconds, but now it'll run really quickly again. And then here, my login link takes me to /login, and we get the dummy message that we get because we made a new controller. Let's look at that before we look more at the instructions. Let's close some of these files that we don't need open anymore. We'll keep that one open for a second here. But let's look at our login controller. And first of all, this by default extends the base controller. We actually want to change it to extend our app controller. We won't need the block title. And what we're actually going to do here is we're about to replace everything that is inside of the body block. And this is what I was talking about before, that we have our app controller that gives us our general page structure, but down here we have block body, and some kind of content is going to go inside that body. And so now we're going to extend, we're also going to identify this so we know what it is while we're looking at it. Just put a comment at the top. This is the template for the login form. And now if I go, because this body is empty, if I refresh this now, variable title does not exist because we didn't send it. Okay, good to know. That caught that right there. So here in our render, we need to fix title. And this is going to be log in. There we go. So now we can go back to our instructions and see what's next. So what's next is, this is showing us the controller that just got created with this step. And this is kind of important now. This is telling us we need to add some information to our security YAML file for the login form. We need to set the login path and the check path. So, and that goes right down here under firewalls main. There we go. App login is the name of your route created previously. That is what we did. And the reason we want to do that is because some super cool magic is going to happen. But now back on our controller, first we need to include the authentication utils. We need to set up so we can use that. So we'll put that statement up here and then make sure that is sorted. It is good. And then we have some interesting code here that it wants us to add. That's giving this as a diff, so we have to kind of cobble it all in. First of all, we're going to pass authentication utils to our, this is going to be our login. Oh, that was another thing I wanted to change. Change index to login in my personal preference. It returns a response. We'll put in the authentication utils here. So now we have that available. And then we're going to grab these lines of code. And we're going to put them in here. And because that was a diff, we need to get rid of some stray characters. There we go. So basically what we're doing here, the cool thing, if you read the full documentation, you'll see, is that by specifying that this is the login path, it's automatically going to check for a form response from a login form and do things with it. And then if there was an error, we'll have an error value. And if there was a previous user and username entered, we'll have this last username. And also, we will, if we're logged in, we will be logged in. That's kind of the magic piece that we don't have to see here. And then we need to, we included our title because we need that for our template. And then we also need to include the last username and the error. We want to send those things to the template so the template can use them. And so the next piece of work we need to do, right here, like this documentation says, don't let the simplicity of this controller confuse you. It's only going to render the form. Symfony is going to take care of everything else. And so now inside block body, we need to copy all of this information and replace our login form, build our login form. So let's look at that real quick. If error is set, then we're going to display it. We're going to make a form that's going to ask us for, this is our username, not our email. They got the field name right, but the prompt was wrong. And it's going to set a default value. Here's the password. And then if we want the user to be redirected, we actually want the redirect to be the front page. On a successful login, we want this to redirect back to the home page. And so that should be our path to get back to the home page. And then here's our login button. So let's see how we did. Literally isn't any more fancy than that. Here's our username is admin. Our password was admin. We went back to the home page and we have our admin and log out menus here now. They don't do anything yet. We haven't made them. But if you look down here in the profiler bar, you'll see that we are now logged in as admin and we have roles of admin. Actually, if we click on this, it'll give us all the details. Here are our roles and we're all set up. We're ready to go. We are logged in as the administrator. So that's pretty cool. That's all we had to do to get a user created. I'm going to skim down past a little bit more of this. Again, highly recommend. Highly recommend we go ahead and turn on the CSRF protection in login forms. So for that, all we have to do is grab this line right here and put it in the security YAML file. And then we need to add this hidden input in our login form. We'll just put it down here before the submit button. And it's going to generate, and we're going to have that token available. And so now we can't log out yet, so we can't, actually we can test this. Symfony will let us go back to login and log in again. And in fact, let's make sure, let's prove that this, I put a random password in there just to prove it doesn't work. We got our error, invalid credentials. We don't have any good, we have a div here with no class on it. So that's kind of not cool. Let's give this a class of error message. And I don't know, I don't think I have anything in my CSS for that right now. No, I don't have anything in my CSS for that right now. But now that actually that div that we copied from the tutorial has a class of error message on it, so we can actually style that and make sure that the user sees that they got a big error. And then we log in as admin correctly. We are logged back in as admin. Everything worked, and that means that this CSRF token also worked. Skip JSON login for now. That is for REST APIs. A very handy, cool thing to have. A lot of really good stuff to have in here. What we need right now is we need to go down and find the information about how to log out. That's what I'm looking for now, because once we get that, we'll be set. So here we go, logging out. Again, we just add the logout path for app logout to our security YAML file. So we'll just come down here and stick that in. Actually, that's probably the wrong place. No, it is the right place. It goes right underneath the login form stuff. Get rid of that comment too. And then we need to make a route to log out. We just need to define the route. And so they give you some code here and they say put this in your security controller, which is where I'm going to put it. I'm not going to make a new security controller. I already have one. This just has to exist in a controller somewhere. This is our /logout route. And it is app logout. And this should actually throw an exception because this should never actually run. Let's come back to our menu and fix the logout link so it works. And refresh our page. And now log out. Log us out. We are no longer a user and our menu changed back to log in. And so that is pretty much all we had to do, other than some basic cleanup here. Take a look again at what we changed first. So we added these pieces to the security YAML file to tell us where the login and logout live. And we fixed our menu links so they actually work. And then we added the controller and the template. And we are done. So this is our basic setup right here. This gave us everything we needed to actually have the database. Again, we have a user in the database now. So that part is working, and we can log in and log out with that user. And there are a million other things you need to do, obviously, when building a full-fledged web application. But we are set up right now with everything we need to create our TV watch list app.